Hi there. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Ryan Nobles, and we are going to start with the breaking news. The harrowing situation out of Toronto, where a Delta Airlines flight with 80 people on board has crashed while landing at Pearson Airport, that according to the FAA. This is video of the commuter regional jet upside down on the runway. And this is footage that NBC News has obtained of crews responding to the crash. Now, we're still gathering information about what happened, but we can tell you, I should say, that the flight took off from Minneapolis. These are live pictures of the scene right now, and according to local authorities, at least 9 people have been injured. 1 child was taken by ambulance to a local hospital, and 1 person was airlifted to a nearby trauma center. But miraculously, officials say that all passengers and crew are accounted for. NBC News senior correspondent Tom Costello covers aviation for us. He joins me now, and in a moment I'll be joined by Captain John Cox, who's an NBC News aviation analyst. So, Tom, I know we are just learning everything that's happened in the aftermath of this crash. Just get our viewers up to date about the latest information that we have.
Yeah, this, as you see there on your screen, this was a regional jet. We call it a CRJ, a Canadian regional jet, which means it was made by Bombardier, flying from for Delta Airlines from Minneapolis down to, or up to, Toronto, flight 4819. And as it came in and landed there on the runway, something went wrong, and we're still trying to figure out what went wrong. But somehow it then skidded to a stop, flipped over in the process, and there were flames and visible smoke immediately after it came to a stop. Amazingly, thankfully, all passengers and crew did get out and are accounted for, that according to the Toronto airport. But as you mentioned, 9 people were injured, and 1 is a child, another one airlifted to a Toronto area hospital. We can tell you that the FAA also confirming that this was Delta Airlines Flight 4819, run by or flown by Endeavor, which is one of those regional carriers that flies on behalf of an airline. So Endeavor/Delta 4819, Minneapolis to Toronto. We don't yet know exactly what went wrong. Fire department on the scene very quickly and doused it, as you can see, with foam and with water to make sure that they got that fire out. All of the exit doors, as you can see, appear to be open, at least on that side of the plane, suggesting that people were able to get out once they unbuckled from their seats. Presumably, some of them were literally hanging upside down because this plane was upside down with its, you can see its wheels there sticking straight up in the air. And so the question now for investigators, and this will be headed up by the Canadian Transportation Safety Board, is what precisely happened, right? Was this a combination of the weather, because it was 18 degrees, blowing snow? They've had about 20 inches of snow at the Toronto airport over the last few weeks, over the last week, I should say. Were those contributing factors? We simply don't know at this point. The fire department and also the police investigators are right now on the scene. The FAA and the NTSB will also be a party to this investigation because the plane started in the United States and it's a U.S. carrier, but the Canadians will be in charge of investigating what happened. And of course, Ryan, this all is a part of the series of incidents we've had in aviation over the last 2.5 weeks, which have really caused a lot of people a lot of concern about aviation safety. We had that mid-air crash, of course, involving the regional jet and an Army helicopter here in Washington, 67 people killed. A medevac Learjet going down in northeast Philadelphia, 8 people killed there. Then we had the flight in Nome, Alaska, trying to get to Nome, Alaska, ended up in the icy, floating ice waters off of Nome, 10 people killed in that crash. None of these seem to be linked by any particular causal relationship, but it does raise concern about the overall state of aviation safety right now, Ryan.
And Tom, when you look at the pictures, even for those of us without the untrained eye that you have, it seems pretty obvious that the wings are not on this plane. I mean, that has to be at least part of what investigators are going to try and figure out. What happened to those wings as this plane came down?
You're exactly right. We were looking at it as well and noticing that the right wing appears to be missing. And so how did that happen? Did they drag a wing as they were coming in and then that wing snapped off, flipping over the plane? That is pure speculation, nothing more at this point. But you're right, the wing, at least one of them, is missing. I've never seen a commercial plane like this in an accident in which it literally is upside down. So amazing that that has happened. Amazing that everybody got out okay. We are hopeful that those who were injured are also going to be okay. As we said, the paramedic service there that handles the greater Toronto area is saying that they did have 9 patients in total, one of them a child and one of them airlifted as well into one of the hospitals into Toronto.
Okay, Tom, I know you've got to get busy preparing for some of our other broadcasts tonight on this important story, so I'm going to let you go, and we're going to bring in Captain John Cox, who's an NBC News aviation analyst, to talk more about what we're witnessing here. Captain, just your initial reaction to what you're seeing here. Do you have any theories? I know you don't want to speculate, but what could possibly have gone wrong to lead to what we're watching right now?
Well, I think one of the things that you just mentioned, the fact that the right wing is missing and it has obviously sustained quite a bit of damage. That's something the investigators are going to look at. They're going to look at the weather. Fortunately, the airplane is in one piece, so it'll make recovering the flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder pretty easy. So they'll have that data downloaded from it within a day or two. So they'll know, the investigators will know pretty quickly what the pilots knew and what the airplane physically did for it to end up in the way that it did. When it's all together in one piece like this, it says that it was at lower speed, lower energy. The doors were all opened. The cabin crew did a great job about getting everybody out. I'm really glad to hear that everybody's accounted for. So there's more questions and answers here, but that right wing not being attached to the airplane is something clearly that the investigators are going to want answers for.
And you mentioned that the fact that it's all in one place likely means that the energy level associated with the plane would not have been as great as if it had been if it had broken apart. Does that indicate to you that perhaps this crash didn't really begin to manifest itself until the plane was already on the ground? Or is there a possibility that it began tumbling as it was coming? I know that we're speculating here, but just based on your expertise, is it possible that it landed and then began the process of flipping over?
That I think the question then centers on the wing. When did that wing depart the airplane and what caused it to depart the airplane? So I think when you get there, answer those questions, it will send you on it'll give you a good understanding of what happened.
Mm-hmm. And we've seen weather reports that there were gusty winds there around the time of this plane landing. I mean, how powerful would a wind gust have to be to interrupt the plane landing and ending up in a fashion like this? Could wind have been enough to play a role in this?
I think certainly the wind was gusting, according to the weather reports, somewhere between 25 to 35 knots, which is about 38 miles an hour. So it would be quite breezy up there. Professional pilots and airliners do operate in weather like this frequently. They're certainly trained for it. So what changed here? And that's what is going to be the question. Can airplanes operate safely in these conditions? Yes. What happened here? That is where the investigators are going to look.
Could it mean then that there was something wrong with the plane itself, that it couldn't handle those type of conditions?
Too early to tell. Too early to tell. We're back at the same question of what caused that right wing to have the damage that it does. That's going to be very central. When that occurred, how that occurred, that's going to be very central to the investigators' initial questions.
You know, it's pretty remarkable watching these passengers evacuate the plane in the condition that it's in. I imagine that the flight crews prepare for every possible scenario. You know, we've all been on a plane where they've told us what to do if there's a water landing, you know, how to get the flotation devices, how to undo your seatbelt. Is there training for how to get a group of passengers off a plane that has been completely flipped upside down?
There's training on how to open the doors. And regardless of the orientation of the aircraft, the doors operate the same way. So the cabin crew and the pilots are trained to operate those doors. And in this case, they did a great job.
And obviously, there needs to be a degree of composure with this flight crew, right? Because you know, I think I heard you say earlier that there's a possibility that perhaps some folks may have been injured as they were trying to get out of their seats because they would have been upside down inside the cabin when the plane finally came to a rest. How important was it for the flight crew to then go into that mode of making sure everyone got off the plane safely at that stage?
This is exactly why the crew training for all airline crews is so rigorous. This is you constantly, every year, you practice opening exits so that it is something that if you do have an event, it becomes almost automatic. And after you've flown a number of years and you've experienced different things, that training is you're constantly thinking, okay, if I have to get out of the airplane, where's the nearest exit? How does it open? What do I need to do? And those things, I encourage passengers to think the same way. I certainly do. Mm-hmm. So you can help the flight crew get people out. The idea is we need to get everybody out quickly, and this crew did just that. So, and I know Tom went through the list of what seems to be just a rash of airline incidents that we've seen just over the past month. Obviously, the situation here in Washington, D.C. with the Black Hawk helicopter crashing into a passenger jet, the Alaska plane crash, the situation in Philadelphia, and now this. Are these all just a coincidence, or is there a possibility that there needs to be some sort of overall review of what's happening in the skies? I don't see any common link between these two. The mid-air collision in Washington is under intense investigation right now. The Nome, Alaska event, single engine, small airplane in very, very difficult weather conditions. I know that they're going to look at why the airplane was dispatched and why it was making that flight. So I don't see a correlation between those two. The Philadelphia airplane, at this point, we don't know what happened to that airplane. It's a very unusual flight profile. It's a private airplane. It's an older airplane. So, and then now this, I don't see linkage between any of these unfortunate accidents.
Okay. Well, John Cox, thank you for your expertise. We're going to continue to keep a close eye on this situation. So if you could stick close, and if we get more information, we'll bring you back in. But we appreciate you leading us off here today. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
All right, and we're going to turn back now here to politics in Washington, D.C., where the Supreme Court is poised to hear the first major legal challenge of President Trump's second term as the administration tests the limits of its authority to unilaterally remake the federal government. It comes as President Trump this weekend seemingly suggested he believes he's above the law, posting a quote on social media that's often attributed to Napoleon. He who saves his country does not violate any law. The pace of the developments, the mass firings, DOJ's expanding access to key government systems, and all the associated legal challenges is moving at a disorienting speed, which the president is celebrating as a victory.
Tell you what, this country has made more progress in the last 3 weeks than it's made in the last 4 years, and we're respected again as a country. It's a big, tremendous saving for our country. We want to downsize government, but make it better. Run it better, but downsize.
The downsizing Mr. Trump was referencing is now hitting even more departments and agencies, including the FAA, where the union representing its employees says that close to 300 of its members received termination notices over the weekend. The CDC, where disease detectors were among the hundreds of workers fired in recent days, and the IRS, which is expected to lay off thousands of probationary workers even as tax season ramps up. But in a sign of moving too quickly, perhaps, the Trump administration is now seeking to unfire workers from the critical agency that oversees the nation's nuclear secrets. But finding those workers has been complicated by the fact that the White House no longer has a way to reach them after disabling their access to government email and other communication systems. Those firings, along with other Trump administration policies, led to thousands of people to protest on this President's Day here in Washington and elsewhere around the country. Meanwhile, an employee affiliated with Elon Musk's Doge is expected to request access to an IRS system that houses sensitive taxpayer information, as a federal judge held a hearing today on whether to block Musk and Doge employees from accessing federal agency data systems. And the White House is now asking the Supreme Court to intervene after lower courts temporarily reinstated the head of the agency that protects whistleblowers after Trump tried to fire him. I'm joined now by NBC News White House correspondent Yamiche Alcindor, NBC News Supreme Court reporter Lawrence Hurley, and Lisa Ryan, who covers the federal government and federal agencies in particular for the Washington Post. So, Yamiche, let's start with you. Does the White House have concerns over the impact these mass firings are going to have on basic government services?
It's a key question, Ryan, but as of now, it does not seem that way. I've been talking to a number of White House officials who continue to just reiterate that all of these cuts are really things that they see as necessary to do away with waste and fraud. And just a few moments ago, I was talking to Stephen Miller right here in the White House on the driveway here right behind me. I'm asking specifically about a number of immigration judges that were terminated last week because, of course, the president has been saying that immigration is a top priority for him. So I asked Stephen Miller, well, aren't you worried that if you do away with these immigration judges, it's just going to slow things down because there's already this big backlog? He said, no, judges who are being fired are essentially judges that are not seen as performing their jobs well. So this is really a White House that is doubling down and moving at lightning speed. Though we have heard Elon Musk, who, of course, is leading DOGE, this Department of Government Efficiency. He's been saying that there are going to be some mistakes being made. Of course, Peter's reporting that they are now trying to rehire these employees that oversee the nuclear stockpile are sort of an example of that. The government essentially said, you know what, we made a mistake. We actually think we need these people in the Department of Energy. So they're trying to get back in touch with them. So it really is an example of the White House trying to, in some ways, do back up a little bit. But overall, I don't hear a great concern about any of the consequences of this, Brian.
Yeah, I mean, Yamiche, there seems to be a real world example here of them moving too quickly with the situation with the Nuclear Security Administration workers. But it doesn't seem that even something as dramatic as this, where they literally cannot get in touch with these people who are in charge of the nuclear secrets, are going to cause them to change their tactics at all?
That's what it seems like. And, you know, there's this Silicon Valley mantra, move fast and break things. And I was talking to a Clinton administration official who pointed out that in Silicon Valley, of course, part of where Elon Musk is thinking has come from, that when you do something like maybe fire too many people at Twitter, that might mean that a website that we all maybe like to use is down. But when it's the federal government, it could mean that lives are actually at risk. So there is real concern here from critics of these moves. Of course, you also have union officials who are going to different courts to try to slow things down. And then, of course, we have that first case that's really going to make its way up to the Supreme Court. That's being filed by a government watchdog, a whistleblower agency there, the Office of Special Counsel, a Biden appointee who's saying that he was fired illegally. So the Supreme Court is going to weigh in here in short order. So maybe that'll change things. Maybe it won't. But certainly the Trump administration is leaning in. And the president himself has been praising Elon Musk, saying that he's doing a good job and also saying that he answers to him. So also pulling back, saying at the end of the day, whatever Elon Musk is doing, he's doing it at the behest of President Trump.
Okay. Yamiche, thank you for that. Let's move now to Lawrence. Lawrence, Judge Tanya Chutkan today held a hearing on that effort to rein in Elon Musk's access. Did she indicate how she's going to rule on that matter?
That's right. I mean, she held this quite unusual hearing on a federal holiday, suggesting that it's quite an emergency situation. But based on the reports coming out of the hearing, she's skeptical that states that have sued to kind of limit the access that DOGE has to federal agencies and kind of decision-making in those agencies. She doesn't think that there's an emergency kind of need for them to get that relief that they're wanting, that they can show irreparable harm at this stage of the litigation. She hasn't actually issued a ruling yet, but that's going to come soon. But that's just at a preliminary stage. She still seemed to express real issues with what's going on. It might suggest that down the line she might rule in favor of these states that are challenging this. But at this point, it seems like she's not going to.
And we've probably been waiting for this to come to a head in the Supreme Court, and it seems as though we could be heading in that direction soon. But does the Trump administration face any sort of risk by allowing them to ask, basically, whether or not the firing of Hampton Dellinger was appropriate? I mean, this is essentially going to put it on the line for them in the highest court in the land.
I think this case in particular, they probably feel like they're on pretty solid ground. Obviously, it's a conservative court. The court has already issued a couple of rulings in recent years cutting back or enhancing the power of the president to fire heads of agencies that Congress said should have protections against being fired. The Supreme Court thinks that's unconstitutional. So this case is probably a good one for the Trump administration to take up to the Supreme Court as its first case. Just because of that precedent and the fact that they probably feel like they have a good chance of winning this one.
So could it tell us about these future challenges that are to come, or should we view this in its own light?
Yeah, I think it would probably be too early to say at this point how much this case, if the court grants the Trump administration's request, it probably is not going to tell us how they're going to handle some of these more unknown issues that haven't come up before, which we're seeing, the dismantling of federal agencies, the bringing Elon Musk into the government, where there's concerns over whether he has the appropriate authority to do what he's doing, these kind of separation of powers issues about whether they can just unilaterally decide not to spend money that Congress has appropriated. These are all issues that might be much more difficult for the Supreme Court and more difficult for the Trump administration to win. So people might be in danger of reading too much into this one if the court does indeed give the Trump people what they want.
Okay, Lawrence, thank you for that. Let's go to Lisa now, who covers these government agencies as well as anybody in the business. Lisa, you've been all on top of the speed at which Elon Musk has reshaped the government and how that has circumvented many of the government's guardrails. Kind of explain to us how he has operated.
Well, it really differs by event that has happened. So, so Musk, went into all these agencies, which really shocked a lot of people in the government and outside the government. But the reality is that, Trump, acting through his cabinet secretaries, was absolutely within his rights to let Musk and his team inside, say, the Treasury Department, and then you look at all these agencies where DOJ has come in and looked at sensitive information, databases, all kinds of, data, payment systems. And again, the reality is that, there are laws that are supposed to protect the government from cyber attacks and also from, privacy intrusions into, federal employees' privacy. But the problem is that, they don't quite account for what is going on right now with DOJ, which is that Elon Musk and his team are really coming from within. They've been authorized to come in. Cybersecurity laws are really designed to protect against an outside actor and a foreign government, coming in the way they did 10 years ago with the Office of Personnel Management, which had a lot of 21 million, federal employees and retirees, their data was breached. And then with violations of what's known as the Privacy Act, very old law, actually, there really is not much of a course of action for individuals whose privacy has been violated. So you take a lot of things that the Trump administration is doing, as Yamiche said, with federal employees. So right now, over the weekend, they're firing thousands and thousands of what are known as probationary employees, from the Defense Department to the Forest Service. But the problem is that these employees are on probation, as they might be, at NBC News, as they might be at the Washington Post, and in general, whether it's the government or a private, company, when you're on probation, you don't have a lot of rights to due process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wonder, though, there is still some risk to this, right? It's not just as easy as saying, well, because we have the ability to let all these people go because they're under their probationary window, that doesn't make it okay, right? And at some point, you're going to have to hire someone. Couldn't there be a long-term consequence of hiring someone under a probationary designation when that person could just be fired right away?
Sure. I mean, I think this will, as you say, will have many long-term consequences. The first thing is that lawyers have told us that, the alleged reason why that the Trump administration is citing in every single one of these firings is poor performance. But that's just not possible because we have, fired employees contacting us, sending us screenshots of their very, high, very satisfactory, outstanding performance reviews. So lawyers, have said to us that's just not legal because it's not possible that thousands of employees who are being fired are poor performers. Yeah. But in the long term, yes, I mean it's going to be very hard to attract the best and the brightest who want to work in the federal government, and that's what the Trump administration keeps saying. They want to hire the best people, right? But I don't know. It's really become a pretty unstable job at this point.
And Lisa, Donald Trump has done a pretty effective job of trying to convince most of America that the federal workforce just isn't important in their daily lives. But there's going to come a time where real Americans who think they have no connection to the federal government are going to feel the impacts of these firings, right? I mean, how soon could that come?
Well, people who we've been speaking to over the weekend have said that it's going to come on Tuesday. I mean, for example, a lot of probationary employees who work for the FAA were fired. And these were not administrative assistants. These are people, they weren't air traffic controllers, thank goodness. But, they're people who have, vital roles, observing radar, let's say, that's coming in, from that really needs to be watched from the sky, and other vital roles in the safety in monitoring the safety of air traffic. So there's that. There's also, the Park Service has lost through these probationary firings hundreds and hundreds of park rangers, of law enforcement rangers, and in a few months we'll be in peak tourist season. I don't know that those people are going to be replaced. Yeah. Department of Veterans Affairs, same thing. There are people who are mission critical who have been lost from that agency.
Okay, Lisa Ryan, continue with your terrific reporting. It's as important now as it's ever been. We appreciate you being on. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Coming up, the administration's sweeping cuts to government could throw another wrench into Congress's plans to avoid a potential government shutdown. That happens in less than a month. I'll talk to a leading House Republican next. Plus, Ukraine's president meets the press, what he told Kristen Welker about his vision for ending the war as European leaders hold an emergency meeting in Paris after being sidelined from tomorrow's U.S.-Russia talks. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Let's turn now to Capitol Hill, where House and Senate Republicans are racing each other on dueling reconciliation packages to turn President Trump's tax and spending promises into law. Now, while that is the legislation they want to pass as soon as possible, we haven't heard about a lot of movement on the legislation they have to pass, with government funding expiring in less than a month. Joining me now is South Dakota Republican Congressman Dusty Johnson. He's the chair of the Republican Mainstream Partnership. Congressman, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it. So I know Republicans in Congress are very focused on the reconciliation bills. I know there's a lot of Donald Trump's agenda that you want to take care of with that package, whether it be one or two packages, tax cuts and spending cuts. But you do have to fund the government, and that has to happen by March 14th. And we need to remind our viewers, those are two completely different processes. What you do with reconciliation is separate from what you do with the appropriations process. What are you guys doing right now to make sure the government doesn't run out of money on March 14th?
Well, you're exactly right that they're separate. In fact, they really couldn't be more different. Reconciliation really needs to be focused on mandatory spending, the things that are on autopilot, whereas the annual appropriations process doesn't touch mandatory spending at all. They are polar opposites of one another. And right now we have the four corners. Those would be the top Republican and top Democrat on the Appropriations Committee in both the House and the Senate. They've been exchanging numbers back and forth. Listen, they're still a ways apart, and we are getting pretty close on time, but I'm happy to say we are indeed making progress.
Okay, you're making progress, but, sir, what's going to happen if the four corners come back and say, we're going to put a continuing resolution on the table that still fully funds USAID, that still fully funds some of these other priorities that Elon Musk has zeroed out in the budget and has told Donald Trump is not worth spending money on anymore? Will there be 218 Republican votes available for a spending plan that still has funding for something like USAID?
Well, there's never been 218 votes in modern history for any spending package. The reality is, remember, so the reconciliation, the mandatory spending stuff, that can get done with 51 votes. The annual appropriations package cannot in the Senate. That always needs 60 votes. That means that it is a bipartisan agreement. You have to, it is impossible to fund appropriations with one party alone. So the same kind of package that can get you 60 or 70 or 80 votes in the Senate is the kind of package that is going to get you 100 to 150 Democrats and 100 to 150 Republicans.
But we are in a situation now, sir, where Democrats are very frustrated by the way Donald Trump has conducted this administration in the first month of his term and feel very worried about the way that he is using the funds that have already been congressionally appropriated or not using those funds. Are you sure that Democrats are going to be there to help pass an appropriations package that's going to keep the government open, given the fact that there's so much conflict between the White House and congressional Democrats right now?
Well, let's be clear. If the Democrats don't want to fund government, then we will shut down on March 14th. There is not a single thing that Republicans can do on their own to fund government. Again, you need 60 votes in the Senate. So if Democrats want to pout because Donald Trump is doing things they don't like, then yes, they can shut down government. They can hurt America because they don't like what the president is doing. Now, I would say that would be highly disappointing. When President Joe Biden unilaterally forgave $800 billion of student loans, an act that he had acknowledged was clearly unconstitutional just a few weeks beforehand, I didn't pout. Republicans didn't conspire to shut down the government and hurt 350 million Americans because Joe Biden acted unconstitutionally. Instead, we acted like big boys and big girls. We took him to court and we beat him in court.
But do you think it makes sense to pass a budget that, for instance, would still fully fund USAID, given how the administration has handled the current appropriation for USAID?
Whatever passes in this appropriations package is going to have some Democrat priorities and some Republican priorities. Now, it's clearly going to have some more Republican priorities because Republicans have the House and the Senate and the White House. But we will not be able to secure 10 or 20 or 30 Democratic senators' votes for a budget that has a zero number at USAID. So whether it's a full year appropriations package or a 1-month CR to allow us to finish our work, there's really not any scenario under which Republicans get every single thing we like. That's too bad, but that's the political reality.
Do you think the Speaker understands that? Do you think some of your Republican colleagues understand? I mean, I talked to Chip Roy about this last week, and he suggested that you should put a continuing resolution on the table that zeroes out USAID. I mean, will there be a majority of Republicans that support the idea of an appropriations package that fully funds USAID?
If you're asking me, do I think Republicans and Democrats alike will both vociferously advocate for the funding they want in or out? Of course they're going to do that. I mean, Chip Roy's a smart guy. He understands that kind of rhetoric pushes down, applies downward pressure to funding in some of those areas. You're going to have folks on the Democratic side who are talking about how we need to spend 2 or 3 times what we spent in recent years. The reality is we're $2 trillion upside down every year. If we don't start to take some serious activity to curtail this budget deficit, insolvency looms. Within the decade for both Medicare and Social Security, whatever we do with the appropriations package needs to acknowledge that real work is needed.
Okay. All right. We'll have to see what happens here. You got about less than 4 weeks to get that done. It sounds like it might be a bit of a challenge, sir. But let's turn now to the situation overseas in Saudi Arabia in particular, where the Trump administration and their team going to talk with Russia about ending the war in Ukraine. President Zelensky said that his team has not been invited to participate in these initial talks. Are you okay with that? Are we still treating Ukraine like an ally in these negotiations?
At some point, if we get to a final deal, yes, of course, the Ukrainians need to have a seat at the table. This is their country. Nobody should have any doubt about that. Now, might it be beneficial for there to be some preliminary discussions? That's shuttle diplomacy. That happens literally all the time in these negotiations, where an arbiter, a negotiator like America might talk to one side, the Russians, then go talk to the other side, the Ukrainians, just to kind of get a sense of what are the contours of a deal that is possible. So am I that concerned that they're not at the table today? No. Over the longer analysis, of course, we do want Ukraine involved.
Now, President Zelensky told my colleague Kristen Welker over the weekend that any peace negotiation ultimately has to involve an assurance of security for Ukraine. And that means that the U.S. needs to be there to support Ukraine in their security after a peace deal is signed. Do you still believe that Donald Trump will support Ukraine, and that means financially with weapons and arms to make sure that any sort of peace deal is lasting and that Ukraine is protected?
Well, let's keep in mind, Ukraine is not a treaty ally of the United States. It's not a member of NATO. We have no legal obligation to come to their defense when they're attacked. Now, that being said, of course, territorial sovereignty matters. Of course, countries should not be invaded. There is a role, I think, for all decent, freedom-loving countries to try to support those values. But I mean, it's not our job to fight every single country's wars. I think we've done some good things to help Ukraine defend its own country. But Zelensky is simply not going to be able to put conditions on America with how this peace, which is desperately needed, how it unfolds.
All right, last question for you, sir. I want to put up a social media post from President Trump over the weekend. It says, quote, "He who saves his country does not violate any law." What's your reaction to that? Does that language concern you at all?
I don't know exactly what the president was saying when he meant that. Of course, we're a country that values the rule of law. And just even a few days ago, President Trump, I think very appropriately, said, of course, he's going to obey court decisions that come down. If he doesn't agree with them, he'll appeal them. That's his right. But I think in his statements throughout the week, he clearly made it clear that he understands the power of being a nation where the rule of law trumps any political agenda.
All right. Congressman Dusty Johnson, we packed in a lot there, sir. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks much.
All right, let's talk about it now. Joining me on set is Julia Manchester, national political reporter at The Hill, former Maryland Democratic Congresswoman Donna Edwards. She's also an NBC News political analyst, and Republican strategist Matt Gorman, who is here on Sunday for Meet the Press. And is this just your permanent spot? Are you sleeping?
I slept in the down the hall.
Okay, good,
yeah.
Great. All right. Well, Julia, you just heard that conversation with Dusty Johnson. Is he a little too optimistic that they're going to find a way through here on March 14th and keep the government open?
Potentially. I mean, it's a tough hill for them to climb. But I think the interesting part of this was his response to how Democrats played this. You know, earlier this month, we were hearing from Democrats in the Senate, for example, Elizabeth Warren talking about using this a potential government shutdown as leverage. When asked about it, she said, well, the government's already shut down, pointing to Doge's and Elon Musk's efforts to really wipe out a number of federal workers. But I think it was interesting to hear how Congressman Johnson addressed that, sort of laying blame on them. Look, being in the minority is never fun. It's difficult right now for Democrats to have a unified response. We're sort of seeing them get one, but to Doge, and I'm just curious to see, as we'll see that response happen in the form of, you know, potentially going along with the government shutdown or not working with Republicans on that.
So, Congressman, I want to go to you on that, because Democrats are famous for saying we're going to do whatever we can to keep the government open. Is the situation different now? Should they be using the possibility of a government shutdown as leverage in response to how they feel Donald Trump has handled this first part of his administration?
Well, look, I do think that Democrats are in a position of, look, Republicans have the House, the Senate, and they've got the White House. They've got the number of votes that it takes in the House to be able to pass their own spending priorities. And they seem unwilling to sit down and really negotiate with Democrats in exchange for those votes. And so I think, you know, from Democrats' perspective, it's like, if you've got, you know, all three of the levers of power, then you should use them. And I think for a lot of Democrats, this really is a line in the sand, because they have been in a situation where Republicans have cut a deal and walked away from a deal. And so there's not a lot of trust that's going on between Republicans and Democrats in this negotiation.
Matt, if it gets to that point and it does shut down, is there a scenario when Republicans have control of the House, the Senate, and the White House, as Donna points out, that Republicans can effectively message that it's the Democrats' fault that the government shut down?
The only time we've won a shutdown argument was 2018. It was the, quote, Schumer shutdown. I remember I was at the NRCC. That was the only one we messaged effectively, because it wasn't the exact same scenario, but very similar, where Democrats took something off the table, wouldn't agree to a McConnell deal, and we felt very confident. We were bullish going into that shutdown weekend about how we were messaging of it. And I will say, I will caution this. Doing a shutdown right now, let me play the boogeyman here, would play into Elon Musk's hands. Because once the government shuts down, it's a lot easier to make the case that that's not needed, and that's not needed. So you would play into our hands in a major way, too.
I was wondering that. I mean, expand on that a little bit. Do you think there are some Republicans that actually have no problem with the government shutting down?
Well, I mean, we've seen that over and over again over the years, right? Like, there's a far much more of a muscle memory and a less of resistance to government shutting down than the Democratic side. I think that's fairly objectively the thing to say. But also, again, once you get that shut down, it's a lot easier easier to, it's a lot harder to ramp that back up with someone like Elon Musk and Doge, seeing suddenly maybe that wasn't as needed, or that little part of it wasn't as needed as much either.
Julia, I want to put up some of the firings that we've seen just in the past few days. With the FAA losing workers weeks after a deadly plane crash, the CDC losing workers amid a bird flu outbreak. If there was going to be a potential for backlash to Trump and Musk's cuts, are we going to start to see it soon? Are Americans going to start to feel the impact of these federal workers not being on the job?
You know, I think potentially, and we're actually hearing some Senate Republicans say, look, we have federal workers in our own states that are impacted about this. We don't know essentially what the economic impact for this is going to be. On top of that, there is this image of chaos that is coming out, and there is this concern that, you know, maybe we do like what Elon Musk is doing in theory, but the way he's executing it is too chaotic. So I think that's where you're starting to see Democrats coalesce around that message. I am curious, though, going into later this year, I know it's not an exciting election year, but Virginia is happening. There is a large portion of federal workers living in Northern Virginia. There's a gubernatorial election there in November. So we could potentially see how this impacts election outcomes as soon as November.
And Matt, you know, having been in the perch of the NRCC where you have been in these congressional districts where they have very specific local issues.
Oh, yeah.
Would that start to worry you if you were running a congressional campaign and the midterms are right around the corner?
I could see certainly why I would have salience. If you're at the Democratic National Committee, you push that, what used to be Barbara Comstock's district right out in Loudoun County, and there was another pocket around Richmond where Abigail Spanberger, who's running for governor, that used to be Eric Cantor's district. Those are the type of districts where this could play. But that was always a tight balance, because you're right, you do have a huge federal workforce in those districts. But a lot of parts of the country can't stand the federal workforce. They can't stand the bureaucrats and bureaucracy. So that is always that delicate balance you're doing when you're messaging it from our point of view. And I think that's the tough part for the Democrats, too, is you over-index too much on one side and you lose some other folks.
Well, just a quick reminder, though, only 15% of the federal workforce is in the metropolitan Washington area. 85% of federal workers are all across the country. And when you start to see these kind of cuts that start to go deep, they're hitting places that are areas where the federal job that's there is the only employer in an area. And so places outside of the metropolitan Washington area are going to be able to feel that.
So, Donna, do you think, though, that that's a message Democrats should continue on, or does it still go back to it's the economy, stupid? Should they be talking more about the price of eggs, how inflation hasn't come down, and after Donald Trump promised that prices would come down immediately, and the fact that we have tariffs around the corner that could also impact prices?
They're going to have to play on multiple fields. And I do think that staying on the price of eggs and milk, but also things like cutting back on school nutrition programs, doesn't just affect schools in Maryland. It affects schools in Idaho and South Dakota and North Dakota as well.
Yeah, Julia, I read for Dusty Johnson that social media post from Donald Trump over the weekend. He who saves his country does not violate any law. I mean, how is the White House explaining this one? And I know Donald Trump says a lot of things on social media. We just kind of slough them off. Is this another example of something we're going to forget in a couple days?
You know, possibly. We know that Donald Trump is obviously, I hate to use the cliche, flooding the zone, not only when it comes to Doge, but also on social media. Look, all of us are going to be asking members of Congress, the White House operatives about this, but it is something that I think Democrats will use to zing him in the meantime. And
you know, even the congressman said it's a country of the rule of law, right, Matt? I mean, how far can Donald Trump go with this?
How many times have we said that over the last 10 years? No, look, we're a nation of laws, not men. And this is, I think, a prime example where he'll throw something out there to chum the waters, get cable news spinning, and then everybody's talking about that, and he's doing a bunch of other stuff over here. So, you know, I think he's honed this game pretty well over the last 10, 11 years.
But if he starts to ignore court orders...
But that's always been hypothetical, right? Yeah. Like, there's been absolutely...
They've actually kind of flirted with it this time.
But he actually even has said very outwardly that he's going to comply with the court order. And look, people can challenge court orders, like speak out against them. That's whether you're Donna Edwards, Matt Gorman, or J.D. Vance, everyone's welcome to do that. So that's
Except
fine.
that I'm not in government and I'm not the president. I do think that when the president is challenging court orders, when you have a Congress that's actually not acting in the way that it should for oversight, that does, allow you to read into a comment like that, that something is amiss.
Okay, we got to leave it there. Thank you, guys. Julia, Donna, Matt, thank you. We appreciate it. After the break, the very latest from Ukraine as the Trump administration ramps up efforts to broker talks for a potential peace deal after roiling our alliances in Europe and praising Putin. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. After almost 3 years of fighting, Ukrainian President Zelensky laid out his vision for a peace deal in an exclusive interview with Kristen Welker on Meet the Press.
Can you accept any peace deal that is cut without Ukraine?
No.
And do you feel like you have a seat at the table right now?
I not only count on it, I'm sure that we have to be there. Otherwise, it's not acceptable.
Let me ask you big picture, though. Do you think President Trump is negotiating in good faith?
I hope so. I hope so. Yes, I count on it.
It comes as Ukraine is notably absent from talks set to begin tomorrow in Saudi Arabia between Secretary of State Marco Rubio, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, Mideast envoy Steve Witkoff, and top Russian officials. NBC News chief foreign affairs correspondent Richard Engel is on the ground in Ukraine with the latest reaction.
As he promised during his campaign, President Trump is acting quickly to try and end the war here in Ukraine. But Ukrainian government officials we've been speaking to and people in Ukraine are nervous by what they're seeing so far. First, President Trump had a long conversation, about 90 minutes, directly with Vladimir Putin. And now those peace talks are starting in Saudi Arabia. Officially, they are set to take place tomorrow, starting with Russia. And Ukraine isn't invited to the talks. And it is a senior level delegation that has arrived in Saudi Arabia with the National Security Advisor, Secretary of State, President Trump's personal envoy, Steve Witkoff, who he's used to carry out other sensitive negotiations, including the ceasefire talks in Gaza. So government officials here are watching this. They are worried that they are not being taken as a priority, that this country potentially is going to be divided up between President Trump and Vladimir Putin. There is an old expression in diplomacy: if you're not at the table, you're on it. And here, Ukrainians worry that this country is now on the table. President Trump has said that Ukraine will be involved, that President Zelensky will be involved in this process, and the Trump administration is sending another envoy to Ukraine later this week, but not the same high-level delegation. And it is second. It is the second conversation. We will see where this goes, but already people are concerned. And I spoke to a woman earlier today, a volunteer at a shelter. They were holding an event for children here in southern Ukraine. There are still frequent Russian attacks. Power cuts happen all the time. Very little electricity, which is quite a hardship in these very cold winter months. People are still often spending the night in shelters. There was this party in a shelter underground for the children, a Valentine's Day event to try and lift their spirits. And I spoke to one volunteer there, and she said, of course, people want peace in this country. They want to stop living like this. They want the Russian attacks to stop, but they don't want to see terms dictated by President Trump imposed on Ukraine. Richard Engel, NBC News, Mykolaiv, Ukraine.
All right, Richard, thank you for that. Let me now bring in John Erbs, who's the former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine and a senior director of the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center. Ambassador, what's your reaction to this strategy by the Trump administration to meet with the Russian officials before sitting down with the Ukrainian leaders?
It is idiosyncratic. And it's true that by Trump reaching out to Putin while he's conducting this war of aggression and agreeing to talk first with the Russians, he's raised eyebrows in Ukraine. Their concern is legitimate, and also amongst our allies in Europe. But we've known that Trump's diplomatic style, is idiosyncratic. And if you go back and look at the way he interacted with the leader of North Korea in his first term, you saw some similar characteristics. Some bluster, as Trump blustered at Putin in his first week in office. Then some fatuous flattery for the leader, the strongman leader in North Korea before, Putin in this case. And then some talks, some negotiations from which Trump walked away when he didn't find something suitable. So nervousness is understandable.
So what would you consider to be a good outcome of this meeting between the U.S. and Russian delegations?
I'm not certain what to expect in this negotiation, except the Russians are not eager to concluded an agreement because they want to continue to pick up additional Ukrainian territory, and they would like to drive Ukrainian forces out of the Kursk Oblast, which is Russian territory. And I think they also want to use this period for Putin specifically to work on Trump to weaken the terms Trump has set down for Russian compromise, which Russia has refused to accept. That's what I expect to happen tomorrow and in further U.S.-Russian negotiations.
So is it important for President Trump to meet with President Zelensky one-on-one, face-to-face, before he has any sort of meeting with the Russian president? He's signaled that he's planning to meet with Putin. Does he need to meet with Zelensky first?
That would be preferable, but it's not essential. Look, again, Trump is an idiosyncratic figure. He can run negotiations his way because he was elected president of the United States for a second time. But he has laid out a vision for an end to this fighting that requires serious compromise by both Ukraine and Russia. And he's put down two conditions for Russia, which they've rejected. But these are still the terms that Trump's team has laid out, which is one, a demilitarized zone between Russian and Ukrainian forces where European troops would be deployed as peace enforcers, and is sending massive arms to Ukraine to deter future Russian aggression. The Russians don't want to accept that, but I think Trump will continue to insist. And he said even last week, amidst some very undiplomatic and I don't think particularly helpful statements, that he will continue to provide arms, provide aid to Ukraine, because otherwise Putin may try to go for everything.
Right.
And Trump will not allow that.
Yeah, I mean, how important is that piece of it? I mean, Ukraine, do they have any leverage at all if they also do not have the assurance that the U.S. will be there to support them at the back end of any peace deal negotiation?
Well, right now, it looks like we're not talking about American troops on the ground. But the notion of European troops could fulfill that function. A, if they're given American logistical support and equipment. B, if they're given American intelligence. And C, and this is the really tough one, there would have to be some type of, in my mind, assurance from the United States to our allies who are in Ukraine enforcing peace that we would help if the Russians start to shoot at them. And that will require a significant negotiation between the Trump team and the Europeans who are now trying to step up to put troops on the ground, as Trump has suggested.
And what does that mean more broadly about the Trump relationship with NATO? I mean, he's flirted about even perhaps pulling the United States out of NATO. What are folks in Europe saying about that relationship?
Well, certainly the Europeans are nervous about Trump's views on NATO. But Hegseth said last week that, we're not planning on leaving NATO. He said we want a strong NATO. And that Trump talked about leaving NATO many years ago. It hasn't been on his lips lately, as far as I'm aware. But they are still nervous about his commitment to Europe. Europe has been stable because NATO was created and because America took a strong lead in NATO. So now that the Trump team wants to back off a little bit in Europe, the Europeans are understandably nervous. But they have a right to ask for major American support if they're going to take on the dangerous and a critical role of making sure Putin does not renew aggression against Ukraine if a peace deal is reached. Okay. So I don't think Putin wants to reach a deal which would prevent him from going further into Ukraine.
Okay. Ambassador John Herbst, thank you for your expertise. We appreciate it. So much going on in Europe and beyond. We so value your input on this. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And we're going to be back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now, but there's plenty of news still ahead. More on that plane crash in Toronto and more. The news continuing now with Gotti Schwartz, who is in for Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.